Help of Hashem, we are learning Taanis Daf Yutes. We will start on Daf Yutches Amid Beis towards the end of the Amid by the new Mishnah, by the new Perek, the third Perek. As we spoke out when we were Messiah Perek Sheni, up until now, we were speaking about what we did, how we fasted, how we reacted, when there was a delay in the rain period. Over there, since the tzara comes gradually, therefore, we reacted also in a relatively gradual process. As we learned, first you have the fast days of only Yechidim, not a imposed communal fast. Then after Rosh Chodesh Kislev, according to the sheet of our Mishnah, regarding when should the first three rains of the Reviyah come, if that time passed and still there's no rain, so then there were three fast days. We call them the three initial fast days. Then we had the three middle fast days. Then we had the final 7 fast days. And there was a gradual progression as to how stringent were those fast days. Our Perek will begin speaking about other calamities that Chazal understand them to be of an immediate emergency. And when you have an emergency, then right away, the fast days, the tiniest tzibur, are like the final 7 fast days. They come with the greatest of stringencies. So we're going to learn in the beginning of today's stuff about other types of calamities. Some of them were also drought related, but it was of a much more serious or severe nature. We're going to learn about what happens if there's an epidemic. How do we define halachically an epidemic? And other, God forbid, tzaras that should never come to us, for which, yes, the Chazal would enact immediately the stringent fast days. We're going to learn about the concept of, even though normally we don't cry out to Hashem for personal needs on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, we did cry out, again, when you have these communal emergencies. We're going to have in the Mishnah a story of Choyni Hama'agel. We're going to have in the Gemara later a more elaborate story about Choyni Hama'agel, perhaps a more famous story of Choyni Hama'agel, someone who fell asleep, who got put to sleep for 70 years. We're going to have in the Mishnah another story. Actually, as we'll speak out in Yerushalmi, there is an opinion that says that the story of Choyni Hama'agel in the Mishnah is not the same Choyni Hama'agel that we'll have in the Gemara. The Gemara speaks about a earlier Choyni Hama'agel. The one that we will learn in the Mishnah, according to the Yerushalmi, is the grandchild of Choyni Hama'agel. Just Choyni is the name, and the word Ma'agel means the one who made circles. And as we will see, whether it's the same or whether it ran in the family, that they made a circle in the ground, and they stood inside that circle, and they told God that they will not leave the circle until their prayers are answered. And therefore they were called Choyni, the circle maker, or in our language, in Lashon HaKodesh, Choyni, the one who makes igulim, Hama'agel. We're going to learn, even when it comes to the more serious fast days, you have a concept called something that's bringing about a food shortage, which is bad, but not as bad as that which Chazal will define as a famine. So we're going to have some nuance of what's only relative only, considered a food shortage called a betzoirta, what's considered a kafna, which is considered a famine. And again, that will affect the severities of those fast days. And if we'll have time in today's daf, we will learn the amazing story of Nagdimoin Ben Gurion. There is a certain nuance of the story that perhaps people are not that familiar with. And as we get into the sugya, again, most of the daf will be just defining how do you define different types of calamities, but we will begin, at least if we'll get to begin with Nagdim and Ben Gurion, that's going to lead us into the next daf, and we're going to start learning in this chapter a tremendous amount of very famous, and we should make them more famous, stories. I just want to give the final small intro, because I think that will be the neshama of daf Yutes, and it's going to give us a good insight to the whole Perek. As we will see, when we have what we consider a relatively lesser of a calamity, so our reaction was accordingly. When you have a more serious calamity, then we would react much, much stronger. But then we will learn a concept that if something is already a done deal, if something is so bad that there is no recouping from it, then we're going to have the concept of, then there's no point to daven. It already happened. And that will really be the nigla part of Daf Yutes. And Dafka, after that, we will begin to learn how certain individuals had the power to affect a miracle. And I think the bigger message is that even when, on one hand, by the laws of nature, something already happened, a terrible thing, it already happened, there's nothing you can do, still, there's always the opening of that there's a God in the world, and God is almighty, and you have tzaddikim that have a koyach because of them being so connected to God, and they actually change the rules of nature. Now, that doesn't mean that you can impose on the community a demand for them to do something in order to affect a change in nature. That not, but such a possibility is always there. Without any further ado, with all these introductions, Chavra, let's hit the books. Let's begin with the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Chavra Daf Yudches Amid Beis in the bottom, Seder Taanis Elu Ha'amur. All of the fast days that we learned above, like we said, the Chidim, the 3, the next 3, the 7. That's only when the Reviya Rishayna. That's only when the Reviya means. Remember, Reviya is an expression of copulation, which is used regarding the rainfall. And again, there's details. It's not that the first of the 3 were delayed, but as we clarified, when all of the 3 were delayed, that is when we enacted, that was Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the first 3 of the communal fast days. And it's gradual. Avol tzmachim sheshanu. The word sheshanu means if there was some sort of change in the that which is coming out of the ground. Now, what type of change further clarified in the Gemara? But this is not a rain delay, which is bad but not terrible. This is considered already terrible. So our reaction was immediate. Masriyan aleyah miyad. Now, guys, we had the word masriyan before. We had the machlokes what the word masriyan actually means. Literally, masriyan means we cry out. Does masriyan mean that we add the anenu, the long anenu alekenu, anenu, barenu. Does masriyan means we blow the shofar? Maybe it means both. And I want to give you as a rule that unless specified otherwise, and people get a bit confused, masriyan generally also includes a fast day. In other words, not only did we fast, which is what we did also in the first 3, but we fasted already with the crying out that we did in the 7. All of the most serious types of fast days, the final 7 is done miyat. And now the Mishnah gives other calamities. It's amazing. If there is a rain delay, it's bad but not terrible. If there is the first rain, what does the first rain cause? It causes for things to begin to take root. If the delay between one rain and the second rain is 40 days or more, that's considered worse. Doing something delayed is not as bad as beginning and stopping. Beginning and stopping, when it comes to the growth, it's going to kill it. So that's another reason why masriyan aleyim, again, masriyan means to cry out, but again, here it means that we fasted and we cried out. It was already like the 7. These 2 that we mentioned is called makas batsoides. Now, again, we mentioned that there's something called a batsoides, there's something called a kafna. Batsoides means a food shortage. Kafna means a famine. We will clarify later that even though the Mishnah is using the word food shortage, but it means it's a food shortage that if things won't change immediately, there's going to be a famine. And that's why Taka fasted and cried out right away. However, what happens if there was partial rains, meaning one type of rain, which is Taka beneficial for the grains, but the type of rain that's needed for trees did not fall. We learned this before, right? The light rains, the heavy rains, or vice versa, if only types of rains, or even if both the rain that's good for tzmachim and the rains that are good for ilanis fell, but still it's not plentiful enough for us to fill up the water reservoirs. Here also, don't think, okay, fine, there'll be grain, there won't be fruit, or we're going to have fruit. This is also considered a calamity, because we need to have both the types of rains that makes things grow, and we need drinking water. Therefore, again, masriyan aleyim miyad. Crying out here also means we cry out and we fast. Now, if in one locale there are no rains, what's important, but the surrounding areas, yes, have rain. And as Rashi points out on the bottom, it's almost like they're being told by God, you see, the surrounding areas are getting rain, but you're being called out for some sort of bad behavior, and dafka, you don't have the rain. That's also considered a tzara. Don't say, well, I'll buy food in the surrounding area. There's a message that Hashem is trying to tell you, and this is connected to that which it says in the pasuk in Amos, that sometimes God, who's running every detail in the world, will make it rain on one city, and God will not cause it to rain on the other city. Similarly, chelka achas timater, etc. The pasuk continues, v'chelka asher loit tamter is going to be tivash. Actually, we're going to learn in the Gemara, and we also quoted this before in the Masechta, that sometimes it's no rain in one location and excessive rain in the surrounding locations. That's considered even worse. That's considered a double tzara. All these details, the Gemara is going to go into great detail. Right? So the din is, going back to the pshat, that even if the surrounding areas have rain, but if one area doesn't have it, daf yutes on the top, oiso ha'ir, that city which got no rain, mis'ana umasra'as. Now here the Mishnah begins to specify fasting and crying out. In the beginning, it meant both. Now we will see 2 times where there's a machlekes tanoim. And to clarify, we're going to separate the fasting and the crying out. I'll give you a good insight. We have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah is a day in which we do not fast, but we cry out. On Yom Kippur is a day that we even fast. So really, as many explained, that the arguments, whether mis'ana or misras, whether we do both, right? And or whether we do one or the other is it like Rosh Hashanah, is like Yom Kippur? But all of the cities around the city that didn't get rain, even though they have rain, even if it did not rain excessively, they also have a little bit of a problem. Why do they have a little bit of a problem? Because the city that has no rain will come buy their food because they need food. So this also might create some sort of food shortage in their location. And that justifies for them to mis'anois, but not masriois. They fast, but they don't have to call out. And Rabbi Akiva says just the opposite, that the cities, again, the cities that have rain, but since they neighbor a city that doesn't have, so the neighboring city is going to go buy all their food. They might have a food shortage. So the opposite, they are only masriois v'loy mis'anois. So I want to make it clear that, again, when the Mishnah just says in the beginning the concept of masri'in, it means both. Only where the Mishnah goes into this nuance do we separate the meaning of masri'in, which means either anenu or shofar or both, and fasting is separate. And another case where we have a similar machlokes. If there is a epidemic, today episode called pandemic, it used to be called an epidemic, or God forbid there's a maplaylist, all details. Maplaylist will mean that there are earthquakes. It's buildings that otherwise were sturdy begin to fall, or sometimes because of tremendously strong winds. So here also, the city that has this epidemic, that is getting these earthquakes, both mis'ana umasras, for them it's a real emergency. But don't forget that if there's a big tzara in one location, people, they have to live somewhere. So they're going to go to the surrounding area. So there's going to be a shortage there. There's going to be pressure there. So again, they do one of the two, and there's a machlekes which one. Tanach says they are misanas v'loy masriyos, and Akiva says the opposite, that they are masriyos and v'loy misanos. Now, how do you define an epidemic? Here's a Mishnah. Ezu dever, says the Mishnah, ir hamitzia chamesh meyos ragli. If we're looking dafke for 500 able-bodied men, that if the ratio to every 500 able-bodied men, the words that Hamoitzia, many people understand is that they can produce 500 soldiers, or the point is they're strong people. And the Yatsu Mimenu Gimel Mason, the Gimel Yamam Zeh Dafke, if from 500, 3 pass away, but not on the same day, 1, 2, 3, 1 person per day for 3 consecutive days, that's called a dever, that's called the epidemic. The Gemara is going to specify if there's a larger, you would think if there's a larger number, it's not called an epidemic, or if you have a 3 people passed away in 2 days. You can say it's even worse. It's not called an epidemic. We're speaking of, we'll see later in the Gemara exactly. It's 1 per day in the ratio of 500. From every 500, 1. Over 3 days, 3 people passed away. Pachos mikan, fewer than this. And both.
Rabbi, it says three each day.
No, I don't think so. We'll see in the Gemara. I have to see later. I think it means 1 per day. I think it means 1 per day. And by the way, wait a second, Yaakov, I'll take back. It can be more than that. It can't be less than that. Now, less than that, just to make it clear, doesn't only mean that it wasn't after 3 days, 3. No, it's 1 per day, Yaakov. Less than that means even if it's 3 people, but in only 2 days. So that it sounds like it's worse. Even if it's 3 people in 1 day, that's not called a dever. Dever is over 3 days, 3 people from 500. Pachos mikan ain't a dever. Guys, we're going to go back where everything will be more broken down or unpackaged better in the Gemara. Another detail. Says the Mishnah. There are certain calamities that even if you're not in the surrounding area, even if you are relatively far away, and how far away, all these things have to be clarified, but you also might get affected to the point where you have to right away fast and cry out, Allah shidafin. Shidafin is a certain type, what's called in English a wind blast. It's something that if it happens in one locale, it's very likely that it's going to happen all over the place, everywhere. And it ruins all of the crops. Or on something called Yeirakin. Yeirakin means that it's not just a drought, is that the color of the grains look yellow, which means that they are completely withering away. Or al ha'arba ba'al ha'chasel, if you noticed in the country, different types of locusts, which might come anywhere. Or va'al chaya, God made it that certain wild animals don't mingle in habitated cities. If you begin spotting these wild animals, you got to right away not only fast in this location, in all of the areas. Now again, what does all mean? We'll see later, more details. If there is any type of troops, of armies, of soldiers that are passing through your country, even if they're passing through to wage war in a neighboring country, the fact that you have soldiers traveling through an area, they can wreak havoc. For that, Masriyan Oleh. Why? It's called a traveling calamity. So it's not localized. So therefore, the tzara potentially is to a larger area, and all of them have to get involved in the fastings. Now says the Mishnah. Maisa, first story in the Mishnah. That the elders, referring to the members of the Sanhedrin, that even though they sat in Yerushalayim, but when they discovered, we'll see in a moment what they discovered, they went all over to Eretz Yisrael, the Gazru Taanis, and they declared wherever you lived in the Holy Land, a fast day, Al Shanira Kumaloi Pli Tanur Shidafen Ba'Ashkelon. In Ashkelon, they found a very small amount of a patch of produce, of grains that became shidafen, that became wind blasted. How much? Only the size equivalent to the opening of an oven. So because of that, they decided that this is something that can spread to the whole land. Wow. Another, what one might have thought as small calamity, that they did not view it that way. That Be'ever Ayarden, which was today, what today is called Jordan, there were 2 wolves that God, the Rahman al-Islam, ate up and attacked and ate up 2 children. And because of that, they declared a fast day all over Israel. However, it wasn't even that they ate up children. Not since they were seen in the city, and these are creatures, these are animals that normally never enter human habitat, just for spotting them, they already declared a fast day. All right, another nuance in the Mishnah, like we mentioned in the introduction, even though normally we don't cry out for personal needs on Shabbos, but here again, we're speaking about sons. Number one, Aliyah, if a city is surrounded by Goyim, or if there is not a river that appears to be on the verge of overflowing and to flood the area. Or if there is a ship that's about to sink in the sea. So we're speaking about people on the ship, There was no communication then. Today, it can be even people on land if they were to find out. Rabbi Yossi Omer, when it comes to only to the above two, both to a city that's surrounded and to a city that's about to sink. We had this in the previous Pedic. The calling out is only to a neighboring area. And this concept that we quoted above, we learned at Rashi above, that when there's such a tzara, and if you're not certain that God is going to answer you, then don't call out on Shabbos. Interesting concept. You can call out to the neighboring areas, they should come save you. That you can do, but to cry out in prayer only if you're certain you'll be answered, and that's.
Rabbi, here Masrian doesn't include fasting, or does it? When it says Masrian, does that mean that you're going to be fasting as well, or just crying out?
So again, that's Masrian l'chayre only means very good crying out, not fasting.
Because that wouldn't be Docha Shabbos.
I'll leave that open. I have to see later. I'll leave that open. I know that what I realized when I was learning this whole daf is that there was no consistency. Clearly, in the beginning of the Mishnah, Masriyan means both. That I saw. Then you had on the top of that Yutes, you had that machloikas. Rebbe always does that. So I don't know. I'll leave that open. Other than Taanis Cholam, I don't think you can fast on Shabbos. I might be wrong. Could be for such a big calamity. Could be you could. Okay, weiter. No. I think Masriyan only means to cry out. You can only cry out. So that's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. Cry out to your neighbor. Don't cry out to God because you don't know whether you'll be answered. Another reason why you can even be Masriyan on Shabbos. Wow. However, even if there's an epidemic, not on Shabbos. See how careful we are not to crawl out for tzaddis on Shabbos. Next. Says the Mishnah, I'll call tzara. Really, when it comes, this doesn't mean to fast shuki. The Chachamim hold that crying out on Shabbos is something that we do. No, this is not Shabbos. That we cry out for every tzara, masri and aliyah, and could be it means also that we cry out and we fast. But the point of this stanza in the Mishnah is chutz mirayv kshamim. If there is excess amount of rains, which makes it very burdensome, but that's not called a tzara. In other words, lack of rain is a tzara. Too much rain, now even too much rain has a limit. There is amount of too much rain that is taka big tzara. We'll see that later. But generally, when there's just a lot of rain, that's not something for which we should call out to God. And now we're going to go to the story. Says the Mishnah, the Chevra told this Jew who was nicknamed Choyne the Circle Maker, again, according to the Yerushalmi, this Choyne HaMa'agel of the Mishnah is the grandson of the Choyne HaMa'agel that we'll have in the Gemara soon, that the one that got put to sleep for 70 years. Okay. She spalul that he spalul sheyer du geshamim. They asked of him that he should daven so rain should fall. So Amar Lohem. Now this happened towards the end of the month of Adar. It was common. This happened during the times of the temple, since we needed to offer a carbon Pesach, after which it needed to be roasted. That the business of buying small ovens, the height of the business was right before Pesach. So all of the oven makers, they would mass produce all of these many ovens, and there were times that they were left outdoors, but they were not finished yet. They were not hardened yet. If it would rain on it, it would get ruined. All right, so Choyne Ma'agel told the Chevre, go and bring indoors, put under cover all of these ovens that he knew was at that phase, and if it were to rain, they will all get ruined, because he knew for sure that God is going to answer his prayers. Because it's going to complete, it's going to fall apart due to the rain. Now, he made a circle, and he stood in the circle, and his spalo, no, he spalo yardu geshamim. First he davened, but didn't happen. Yardu. So also, what did he do? Uga, literally, it means he needed a cake. Now, really, uga is circular, whether it's a cake, whether it's a cookie, and according to most, that's the expression of someone who's going to be in making an indentation in the ground of a circle. So it's called, he was Ug and Uga. And he stood inside the circle. This has tremendous mystical meaning. For Amar Lofanov, many meditations in Kabbalah, that's what people used to do. They would place themselves in a mental circle and surround themselves with the olive bays, v'chule, v'chule. Okay, so what happened was, and your children are turning to me. Why to me? Because I'm like a ben bayis. I'm like I'm familiar with you. I'm a member of your house. So says I swear, I will not move from the circle until you have mercy. And God right away responded, how? Rain began to trickle. Trickling is something, but it's not enough. So Chayni tells God, Loi kach sha'alti. That's already speaking one you can say with chutzpah. He tells God, not thank you, but I want more. He tells God, no, that's not what I asked for. Okay. Ella, what did I ask for? What am I asking for? Gishmei boidish shichanum oiris, a lot of water, even to fill up the water reservoirs for us to have later drinking water. When he said that, tischilu lated bizaf. It began to pulacha in Yiddish. But that's also too much. So Amar Chaydi said for the second time to God, Loi kach sha'alti, that's not what I'm asking. Ela gishmei ratzain bracha nedava. Perfect, not too little, not too much. And you know what? God responded, and your dukatiknam. But it didn't stop. So people began going out of the lower parts of Yerushalayim. Why did they go to the Harabayis? Because on Harabayis there were many roofed areas. People wanted to get out of the rain. So people came to him yet again, and they told him, just like you succeeded, but you daven for the rains to fall. Daven that it should go away. It's too much. So Amar Lahem, that's going back to the point that Masriyim Aleim Chutz Meroid Kshamim. There's different ways of learning the Mishnah, but we're going to follow one approach. So he told them, no, I'm not going to daven for that, because even a lot of rain, it's Taka tircha, but it's not something which we cry out to God for. And the way he told me,
isn't this what we learned in the first Mishnah? That's Kfuris Kshamim. It has to be the right amount, no?
Well, even so, Samach, let me word it like this. There is a concept called a city that's going to be flooded by the water, which Taka, we have to daven for it to stop. Here we're speaking about that Kfuris Kshamim. It means that one drop doesn't touch the other drop in the air. But if there's falling and falling and falling, and it creates a tircha, it's inconvenient. You don't daven for Hashem to take away an inconvenience. And what he told them was, we're going to learn about a certain area in Yerushalayim, and there was a big stone there, and it's called the Even Hatoyin. People who found lost articles would go there, and they would stand on that stone, and they would announce this is what they found. They would give a very vague description, affording people who lost it to go there and to give the samanim and to get back their lost article. So what he said, what Chayna Hama'agal of the Mishnah says, is that if that stone, because of the excessive rains, completely is becoming disintegrated, and by the way, it takes a lot of rain to disintegrate a stone. If that were to happen, then I'll daven to God for it to stop, because then the water is a klala. If we didn't reach that level, it's like a very inconvenient or very, very inconvenient, but I'm not going to daven to Hashem. Okay, that's just backing up this word that I'll call Tzavar Shalitav Elat Zibur Masriyan Aleim Chutz Miroid Kshamim. Sholach Loishim, and then Shatach, who heard about the story, and he tells Chayni Hama'agel that Ilmali Chayni Atov, not for the greatness of who I know you are, Goizrani Olecha, I would put you in Agnidoy. I'm gonna ban you because you spoke disrespectfully. Twice you told God that's not what I asked for. But how can I do anything to you when God doesn't do anything to you? It's you behave in a sinful way, in my perspective, towards God, and yet the fact that Hashem is fulfilling your wishes, an example that he gives is kebein shuhu mischata alaviv. So when you have a child, and that we have children, and they, many times children, they demand things that is not correct for them to demand it the way they demand it. And nevertheless, when a parent loves the child, and all parents love their children, they give to what their child wants. And it's regarding you, the pasuk in Mishlei that Yismach avicha v'imecha v'sogel yoladeticha, that your father, that your mother rejoices, they're happy that they gave birth to you. No, it's of course that goes to every case. Every parent is happy that they gave birth. That pasuk means that parents are so happy that they gave birth to their child that even when their child is asking from something in a non-respectful way, they love him. They give it to him anyways. So therefore, theoretically, there should have been a nidoy, but that's not going to happen. All right. Now let's come back to any of these calamities. So the Chachamim made a Taanis tzibur, and in the middle of the fast day, God answered their prayers, and the calamity was removed. What now? Do you have to finish fasting? That's the next topic. Says the Mishnah, and if they were fasting, so like this, there is. From when are we prohibited to eat? We already learned above. Even when it's only a daytime fast, the prohibition begins from dawn, from alois, not from the night before, but it begins from dawn. On the other hand, as we will see in the Mishnah, the fast is really only beginning from sunset, which you can't eat from alois, but you're not fasting alois. There's going to be another shita that says that since most people only have one meal until noon, even until noon, you can't say that you're fasting. You're not allowed to eat, but you're not fasting. The point will be that once the fast began, you got to finish it. As long as we can view what you did as not properly fasting, then you can eat even before the day is over. If they began to fast, the Yardon Geshamim in the case where we needed rain, and rain began to fall, but the rain began to fall even before the sunrise, before the nates. Says the Mishnah, Lo Yashlimu. In other words, like this, even though, again, we were usher to eat from alois, but the fast is only considered the fast from sunset. So since it wasn't even sunset, so you didn't begin. If you didn't begin, you can eat. However, if the rain only fell, makes sense. So you already began. If you began, then yashlimu, you have to complete the fast, which means what we call until say sakri chodem. Rabbi Eliezer says the same logic, but he applies it differently. And the prohibition, according to everyone, is from Alois HaShachar. But Rabbi Eliezer holds that since what happens until midday? Till midday, some people eat 8 in the morning, some people eat 9 in the morning. We learned all of the Chazal. It's only afternoon. If you ate your first meal afternoon, that's like putting in the stone in the wine skin, as we had that expression. So if the rains fell before Chatzos, you didn't really begin to fast. Anyways, you don't eat until then. So therefore, lo yashlimu, you don't need to complete it. But if the rain only began to fall, then again, once on any level the fast began or you're fasting, then yashlimu, you should complete the fast. Now, my son, not invited a story. Even in the Mishnah, we have all these stories. My son, she goes to Taanis Belud, and because of a lack of rain. And God answered their fast, and God answered their prayers. And it fell before midday. So Amar lehem Rab Tarfon, siding with the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. So it's not, it's he held. They don't have to complete their fast. Not only that, since rain is coming, make a simcha, make a special sudas yomtiv, and va'yatzu va'achlu v'shasu va'asu yomtiv. And then Rab Tarfon told them, hold on. After you're going to make this big feast, come back to the shul for the afternoon after your feast, and v'karu halil halgadol. We have the psachim halil hamitzri is the tehillim that we say in Yom Chav Dalet, what we call halil. Halil halgadol is kapitel kuf lamed vav. It's much shorter. It has 26 ki la'olam chazdois, including noisem lechem l'chol basar. So since that was a fast day because of a lack of rain, which would have brought about, God forbid, either a food shortage or even worse, a famine, the rain is how Hashem gives me and you food, b'hashgacha pratis. So that was, again, more details in the Gemara about this Yom Tov and about this the day of fakir prayer. We're crying out in gratitude prior to us crying out in English. Okay, the Gemara is going to begin now with the opening line of the Mishnah. The Mishnah began saying, Seder Taanis ha'elu ha'amur. That up until now, up until the 3rd chapter, when we spoke about the Seder of fast days, it was regarding the Revia Rishoina. Now, these words are tricky because Revia means rain. Rishoina, the Gemara and the Havamina understands to mean the first of the 3. We already learned above that if there is a lack of the first of the 3, we don't impose the communal fast days. The communal fast days were only imposed, right, if Rosh Chodesh Kislev came and went without rain. So fragt the Gemara v'rimino. No, we learned, and we're quoting a Braisa, which is very explicit, that the Revi'ah Rishoinu Shniya, that if only the first, again, we had a three-way machloikas on Daf Vav. When is the first of the three? Our Mishnah followed Rabbi Meir. I think it was the 7th and the 17th, 7th, 17th, and the third day.
Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh.
Could be Rosh Chodesh. Thank you, Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so whatever those three were. But so the Braisa says explicitly that if only the first and only the second came and went, we Taka have to ask for rain, but we don't fast. It's only Shlishis that we begin the fast days. I think we're quoting from the Braisa because the Mishnah did speak about the Yechidim. But anyways, so says the Gemara, no. The meaning of our Mishnah is Amar Rav Yehuda Hachi Kamar. Say the Taanis Ha'amur Emosai. You know, it's when we learned above that you have to begin fasting is Bisman Sheyatza. That's the key word here. Sheyatza Devia. That the rains, which rains? All of the three. Rishoina, Ushnia, Ushlishis. Only then is where we say that since V'lo Yardu Geshamim, we begin to fast, and it's also gradual. Another detail. The first three are the most lenient. But now our Mishnah is adding, if there's also a calamity, rain related, but it's different. The rain fell. The first three rains, one of them fell on the right time. And therefore, once it begins to rain, people plant. But it didn't yet grow. Why didn't it grow yet? Because the second of those rains didn't come. That's even worse. Or another case that the Mishnah gave. You begin to see that when the produce is coming out, it doesn't look the way it normally looks. That's not good. That's much worse than a delayed rain. Doing something later and better is much better than doing something quicker but not good. And that's what our Mishnah is saying, then Masriyan Aliyah. And again, this Masriyan clearly doesn't only mean crying out. This Masriyan means fasting and crying out. Now comes the key. I think this is a big yesod in today's daf. We got to get moving. Amarav Nachman, daf kenishtanu. When do we Taka cry it immediately? If there's a change in the produce, which means it's terrible. But if the rains will fall, there is still, by the laws of nature, a possibility for it to be saved. Avol Yafshu, the way we're going to learn Pshat in Rav Nachman, but if it already completely dried out, which is much worse, but it's worse that without a miracle, it's too late. So then loy means we don't fast, we don't cry out. You know, it's don't cry over spilled milk. And Chavra, to make it clear, the way at least the way I understand the whole flow, the Gemara is going to say later otherwise. We're going to learn stories in the Spedic of Tanoim and Amoraim that cried out after the fact and God made a miracle. But the point is, you can't impose it on the community. If there's still a chance by nature for things to get changed, then you have to make a communal fast day. If you need a miracle, then go to a tzaddik. But you can't force now a communal fast day. Why do I even need Rav Nachman? The Mishnah says the words nishtanu, and the word nishtanu implies that there was only a change and not fully tried out. The Gemara says no. Rav Nachman is needed tzricha, because what happened was that what happens if it got completely dried out? It got completely dried out, and then a change happened. It became a little bit mesuk and da'akun. You have to know farming, how to interpret that. It was completely dried out. Then there's some green coming back into it. Now you might have thought, now it's already, at least there's a chance. So mal the tema that ak nita milsahi. It's the fact that there was some sort of either it grew more, there was some betterment. Maybe it means just growth. If it grew a little bit more, that means there's still a chance now for things to get better. Kamash Malan, that once everything was completely dried out by the laws of nature, it's too late. And once it's too late, you don't impose communal fast days. Like said, the other case in the Mishnah was that if between the one rain and the other rain, 40 days passed, that's already considered a batsoirta and a kafna. Here's this: my makas batsoiris. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, it means maka hamavia l'dei batsoiris. In other words, the word batsoiris chavra means a food shortage. We're going to have another word. The word kafna means a famine. and we are different before we turn to Amid, and we are making a difference between a food shortage and a famine. Before we go on, read inside the Tosfos. I know that we're getting a step ahead, but I want to read Kevin with these pictures here. So we have like this. Look inside the Tosfos, a letter above the men, because we will see that our Gemara will differentiate between a batsoides, which means a food shortage, and a kafna and a famine. So the Tosfos says, hold on, the Mishnah uses the words batsoides, which means a food shortage. The Mishnah says that we right away cry out and we fast. So Tosfos adds another detail. There is a scenario that's a batsoides, which is it's a lesser problem. Our reaction is not as strong. There is something called a famine. When the Mishnah uses the word batsoides, says Tosfos, the Yeshleimer, the makas batsoides of our Mishnah, not like the Gemara, not what we will learn, have a kamoy de chafna, that will be like a famine, because the Mishnah is speaking about scenarios where there might only be a food shortage now, but it will lead to a famine. But that's not what we're looking at. Gemara is going to be separating between a food shortage, which the words will be batsoides or batsoidta in Aramish, versus a kafna, a famine. So Omar Rav Nachman, now we're turning to Amid, Nahara. If there is a lack of food here, but upstream, downstream, there is a place where there is food. Transportation via the shipping is something very easy relative to transporting things on land. Then, even though there's a lack of food here, but since in an area that is connected to here, there, we're upriver, downriver, place where you can just put food on a boat and you can get it here. That's called a batsorta. Batsorta means it's taka bad, but it's not as bad as. It's not considered a kafna. The reaction should not be as strong. But if there is a lack of food here, and the only way to get it is transporting it via dry land, that's the meaning, the way Rashi says, between Medinta and Medinta, there's food in another Medina. Medina doesn't mean another country. Medina means that to get it here, you have to transport it on wagons. That's already more troublesome, and there's a much greater danger that it won't make it here properly, and therefore it's considered the famine. Now, Lamai Nafkamina, again, let's go back to the Mishnah. Whether you fast, or whether you only cry out, that will be a one Nafkamina. Again, our Mishnah, who uses the word batsoides, is not related to our Gemara. Our Mishnah Taka uses the word batsoides, but it means it's a batsoides that will lead into a famine. So in our Mishnah, it means to fast and to cry out. Another interesting way of measuring whether there's a food shortage or it's a famine. The normal price of grain was that with one sela, you should be able to buy the quantity of 4 saw. If with one sela, you can only buy 1 saw, that means that the prices are very expensive. That's a 400% inflation. However, if people still are able with this money to get food, it's taka very expensive. It's like Los Angeles, but you can get it. You're paying $7 here for a gas, but you can get it. That's called a shortage. That's only called relative, a batzarta. But on the other hand, what happens if the prices didn't go up? If theoretically, if with one sela, you can buy 4 saw, but you can't find it. It's nowhere to be found. Arba, but v'lo shchicha, once you go into the supermarkets and there aren't food on the shelves, I never saw that thing out of my life, but speak to your parents that go to Russia not that long ago. That's called already a kafna. So if the government forces the prices not to go up, it doesn't mean anything. Because if there's no food, that's called a famine. Now there's nuance in that. So the Gemara adds, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, hold on. Lo shanu, you're telling me that even if food is expensive, the first case, batzorta, it's not called a famine. That's if you have money. If food is expensive and the commoners can't afford it, that's also called a famine. If it's easy to get money, is inexpensive. That's such a good modern expression, because the interest rates are very little. So you can get your aid loan and pay who knows what, you'll pay less than 3%. So there, even though Taka brings about inflation and the paydays, which means all produce is expensive, it's Taka not good, but it's only a food shortage. It's not called a famine. But if money is expensive, it's hard to get money. Even if the cost of the food superficially suppressed by the government who paid us bizol. So what? So what if for one coin you can get 4 sa, but you don't have the one coin? So then masrin olav miyad. Here shuki masrin here means again to fast and to cry out. To Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that nehirna means ich gedenk that karhava time of dalats in besala. I remember when the prices stayed the same. And this is all government-imposed economies. But there was no food. Now the government did not allow for people to hike the prices, but still there was no food. And he lived in Tiberia, and this is different levels of famine. We should never know that there's a certain point where the human being is starving to the point where the stomachs begin to blow up. And all these pictures I saw from Africa and Nebach, these people. So as I was in Tiberia, the prices did not go up. You walked in the streets, people had these swollen hunger stomachs because no one had an isur. Guys, an isur, I think, is 180 of a seller. It's a very small coinage. No one had money, so the prices stayed low. But that it's not just about the price, the availability. Weiter. The Mishnah gave examples that if the type of rain that's needed for tzmachim fell, but not for trees, or for trees and not for tzmachim, or for this, for that, but not for the reservoirs. So the Gemara explains what that means. Guys, we all had this in the previous perek. What type of rain is that? They got to get moving. It's light rain, we learned, is very good for the grains. It's good for the vegetables. It's good for the herbs. Trees need to have a heavier rain. What type of rain is only good for the trees and not for the tzmachim? Yeah, only heavier rains were falling. The heavy rains fell, light rains never fell. That's also not good. Was what happened? That but not enough to fill up the water reservoirs. But the Mishnah Braisa gives another case where there can be a time that you'll have all of the water reservoirs were fed with rains, but still it was not enough, not for smachim and not for the ilanis. What case is that? The Gemara says, I'll tell you how. That if the asya b'shefichusa, if it pluches, it's like tropical rains, it downpours. Even the tree who needs to have heavier rains, but there's a limit. If the rain falls too strong, then it's not even good for the trees. Semach. That's the gevuras kishamim, that God holds it back. Now, if there's a big downpour, the water reservoirs will get filled, but still the agriculture did not get the type of rain that it needs. That also justifies a communal reaction through crying out, through fasting, or through both. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Braisa. When, you have to know how to measure it. Now, these are really gemaras for the Beis Din. They are the ones who have the power to enact this communal fasting. Masrin al hoilanois, when you begin crying out because the type of rain for the trees didn't come. Only the Proisa Pesach. We're going to teach half Pesach means 2 weeks before Pesach. Prior to the Chodesh Nisan, the lack of these heavier rains doesn't yet justify the Masriyan. Similarly, if they're not filled up, when does that justify the communal fast? Only b'frois hachag, big machloikas, rishonim, whether chag here means what it normally means, which is sukkos. B'frois hachag means at the end of the summer. Many others understand it doesn't make sense because the rain season in Eretz Yisrael is over the winter. So here chag will mean Shavuos, and b'frois hachag will mean 2 weeks before Shavuos. Now, furthermore, im ein lahem mayim lishtois. However, if the problem is that no one has drinking water, there's no date for that. When you're living in a city or in a place where there's a water shortage, that's the biggest calamity. And that demands the highest level of communal fast days. Here says the Braisa, Masriyan Aleim. Masriyan means for sure fasting and crying out immediately. And what do they do immediately? Immediately doesn't mean that we discovered on a Tuesday that there's a lack of water, God forbid. Even the immediate begins always on Monday. We already learned that. It's not an everyday thing. It's Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday, Monday, Thursday. And we also learned previously that we only begin these fast days, dafka on a Monday, because whenever you begin a fast day on a Thursday, it can cause inflation. Oh, the al-kulam, another detail. No, it's how far do these fast days affect? So the al-kulan ein masriyan alein ella bi iparkia. It's a very interesting lashon, which let's say it means that the country shalahem. Okay, every country is different, and these are topics that have to be further unpackaged. In other words, a neighboring country, every country has to make their own judgment whether they have a water shortage. Because the governments were part of the solution, hopefully, of supplying water. So if I'm living in a country where there's no water shortage, even if across the border in Mexico there's a water shortage, it's not my tzara to the point that I have to fast. But pandemics, but illnesses, that's they don't know boundaries. That's the next. But the askara is some sort of disease in which the throat passageway or the air passageway, God forbid, would become inflamed, and people would die from the inability to breathe. This is some sort of contagious disease. The point that the Bryson wants to make, that the askara is worse. That the askara, bisman sheyesh b'misa, if it's the type of disease that's bringing about death, then masriyan aleim. Masriyan aleim means the full-fledged fasting and crying out. Bisman she'ein b'misa, if it doesn't bring about death, then it doesn't demand masriyan aleim. And I also think that the point of the askara is that it's not like water. It's not limited to your country because it's contagious. It goes everywhere. Another din, umasriyan ala goivai b'chol shehu. Goivai is another name of a locust that even if only a small amount were seen, that's a very bad sign. And Abshum and Elazar Omer, even on another type of locust called chagav, they're also, and even if a few of them were witnessed, then all of the surrounding areas have to be masri. And Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in the Braisa masri nalei lanois.
There's diphtheria.
That's askara.
Diphtheria.
Diphtheria. Okay, very good. Is it contagious, Baruch? The way people understand it today?
Yes, but we get vaccinated for it though.
I got it. Okay. I
But
really think
that's what would close your throat off back
Okay.
then.
Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in the Braisa that when we learned above that even if there's rains, but the type of rains that are needed for trees, then we have to cry out. Masrin alayilanois, only during the 6 years of the 7th Shemitah cycle. But Masrin alayilanois only b'shar shnei shavua. Because why? Because since everything that grows on the Shemitah year is ownerless, so therefore people don't rely on those fruits. So people on the 6th year, they store. So even if there's a lack of these types of rains, it's not the end of the world, according to this Tanach. But if there is a lack of the water reservoirs, that doesn't make a difference what year of the Shemitah cycle. Then afilu b'shvius, we also have to be masriyan. I disagree. If there's a lack of rain for the trees, even though it's on the Shemitah year, even though most people or many people were able to put aside food for the Shemitah year, but not everyone had that ability. The poor people are relying for the fruits on the 7th year. So therefore, everyone should cry out for them. Tanya idach, a similar braysa. Masrin alayilanois, according to the first Tanach, only b'shar shnei shavua. Because many people at least don't rely on the produce of the 7th year. It's anyways hefker. But however, but waters that are not filled up in the water reservoirs, then you have to be masriyan even if it's on the 7th year. And now he adds this Bryce has another detail. And that is, even though we're not allowed to plant on the 7th year, but things that grow on their own, which is called sfichen, aftergrowths, they also need rain. So he says, masrin ala sfichen b'shvis, that if for these aftergrowths to grow, you need to have a minimal amount of rain, and you don't have it, so you won't have that sfichen. So you should also be masriyan. I am not relying on it. Who's the I? The poor people are. Tanya, we learned, from when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, we see already a certain concealment of God's presence in the world in the way of the consistency of the rains. Nasu Gishamim, they became Simukim. Simukim means that it's limited, and Simukim means it's not consistent. When the temple was standing, it was exactly how you needed it, and there was a consistency. Shona, there are now times rains that that there's Taka Baruch Hashem, there's abundant rains, but it's not consistent. But they fall on their expected times, which is mamish the ideal. So you can count on it. You know when to plant, you know when to harvest. The Yeshana, that even if the amount of rain was the amount needed, but it didn't fall in the right time. And it makes that much of a difference, as the Tana, as Rabbi Elazar ben Perata explains. If someone is being paid by his master on Sunday, which is a good thing. In other words, Sunday he has sufficient time to take the money and to buy produce and to prepare food for Shabbos. He's not rushed, and therefore nimt says isodna efes ketikna v'nechelas ketikna. You're going to bake it properly. You're going to eat it properly. It's not going to be burnt. Even if the right amount fell, but if it fell in the wrong time, so if you only get paid on Erev Shabbos, you don't have enough time to properly make your food, and you end up eating a burnt food or unprepared food. Even if you have, in other words, the not falling on the right time is also not ideal. Going back to the first thing that he mentioned, not about the right timing, but is there enough rain? If a person gets paid a larger amount at one time, so therefore when you buy your wheat and when you grind it into flour, you are able to do so with a larger amount at the same time. And what's the advantage? There's a certain amount of loss that happens to your grain and flour whenever you grind it. Now, that loss is not proportional to the amount of what you are grinding. Every time you use the machine, there's a small percent that will be lost. So obviously then, if you are grinding a much larger amount at the same time, then proportionally it's a much lesser amount of loss. Same amount, the same amount of loss that happens when you grind a koid, which is a huge amount, same amount of losses when you grind a kav. Not only is that true when it comes to the grinding of the kernels into the flour, but the same thing also happens whenever you are kneading the flour into a dough. There's a small amount of loss, whatever adheres to the pot. Epis you lose, but it's not proportional. So therefore, it's always advantageous to make larger batches at the same time. And that's the milah of getting the right amount of times earlier on in the year. However, even if at the end you get the same amount, but you only get it a little bit at a time. So you can only buy a little bit at a time. So you are only grinding a little bit at a time. That the loss that you would have lost if you would have ground up an entire koir, that is now the loss that you're getting by grinding up a kav. Proportional to the kav, it's much, much worse. Same thing when you need. Nim says that isa kamo shenecheles min hakoir, that amount of loss which would have been, even if you would have needed an entire koir, that same amount is happening even though you only needed a kav. Another expression that the Tana used. That when you are kneading the earth into clay, when you have sufficient waters, not only do you not use up all the waters, but the goal is properly achieved. The mixture is enough for it to be the type of clay that you need. However, if you don't have enough water, even though you end up using the same amount, but you put it in a little bit, and then a little bit, and then a little bit, and a little bit, you end up using more water, and the clay is not even as good. Mayim kolin, but v'hatit einoi misgabel yafe, and all of that And all of that is a result of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. So the point here all is never to view nature, including the weather, as mikra nikra. That's just the way it is. Nothing is just the way it is. The idea of Hashgacha Pratis, which is why whenever there is a little bit of a calamity, not to brush it aside. Oh, that's the way it is. Sometimes it's too hot, sometimes it's too cold. No. Hashem is involved in everything, and whenever something is not ideal, just a general concept. So just recapping, we're going to continue the next story in the next year. So if something is considered, and Chazal determined that a minor challenge, then we begin in a gradual way reacting. If something is considered a huge immediate challenge, then we impose the highest level of fasties immediately. But let's go back to what Rav Nachman taught us. But if something already happened and there's nothing we can do, then we don't force communal fast days. But Abed, now we'll learn a whole Pedic. And the whole Pedic is now we're going to begin with the stories, with amazing stories where we see that Hashem answers tzaddikim who sometimes pray for miracles to happen beyond the nature. So you can't impose it, but there's always the possibility, dafka, because God is almighty, so the gilui of godliness, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, happens through the miracles that are performed through tzaddikim. And God willing, next year we will begin with the first of the many amazing stories with Nagdime and Ben Guran to be continued. Guys, I need a minute to get a coffee. I'm coming right back.
2 minutes or 1 minute?
2 minutes.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Taanis Daf Chof. We left off on Daf Yutes Amid Base, 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We're starting today with the Sipurei Tzadikim, beginning with the great Nagdimoin Ben Gurion. And as we will see, that there was a miracle, rain related, that was performed to him, a lot beyond of what people might have heard the story without learning it properly inside the Gemara. And as we will see, the Gemara is going to record 3 instances that the type of miracle that Hashem performed for us was a miracle in which the heavenly bodies stopped moving. The sun that from our perspective appears to be going from east to west stopped in the east, did not move on for a certain period of time. What is definitely more known is the explicit story that we have by Yehoshua, that Shemesh begivoin doim, the miracle of Gimel Tammuz. Now that we have written in Nach. What we will learn, we will learn in our Gemara that God performed a similar miracle to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the third time that the Gemara records is the miracle that happened to Nagdim and Ben Gurion, that there was a miracle of God stopping the sun in order for Nagdim and Ben Gurion not to have a money loss. Ad kedei kach. Now, really, we're going to quote. There's not over here, but there's a place for San Avodah Zarah that asks Al-Chayda. There is a fourth place, which is by Yaakov Avinu. We'll get to that when we learn the Gemara. We're going to have four cases where there's a pasuk that is speaking about some negative event in which the Amoida, Rabbi Yehuda, sees some positive aspect in something that's negative. We're going to learn the midah toiva of lo'olam yehi adam rach kekana. A person should be soft like a reed. Not when it comes to our Yiddishkeit, but when it comes to interpersonal relationships, ben adam lachavedo, the advantage of being an easy person, not being an unbending person. We're going to have another very famous story in the bottom of Daf Chav, going into Daf Chav and the base, of the Tana Rabbi Elazar ben Rab Shimon, who met an individual that was very unattractive, and he told him how ugly you are. And the hemshech of that story, I'm going to share the Rebbe's insight on the story, and let's see how far we can get. We're going to learn about the greatness of Rav Ada bar Ahava and the miracles that God performed for him, and we're going to conclude, if we'll get there, also learning about the greatness of the Amoida Rav Huna and much, much more. So Chavra, again, Daf Yutes on the base. We left off 10 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Chavra, find a place, Tanach Rabban. Says the Gemara like this: that Pamachas Olu Kol Yisrael Regal Yerushalayim. This story happened during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, and all of the Yidden are going to Yerushalayim, and in the sugya of the lack of rain, so even though we just learned the Braisa, how when the temple was standing, the waters fell properly. L'chura, that Braisa was speaking about the first temple era, where the Shechina was revealed. And as we learned that once the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, and particularly once Gedalia ben Achikam, Rahman al-Itzlan, was murdered, and there was a short period of time where there was not a Yishuv of Yidden in Yerushalayim, that was the only time in its history, the Shechina that departed never fully came back until the coming of Mashiach. So here we're speaking about the second temple era. Yes, there was times that there was a lack of rain. Holach Nagdiman ben Gurion, who was a very wealthy Jew, he went Eitzel Odain Echad. He went to a non-Jew who was also an Odain. He was a lord. He was a very wealthy person. That person owned water reservoirs, and Amaloi and Nagdimoin, who, by the way, Nagdimoin was able to pay for it, but Nagdimoin made a wager with him. Instead of giving him, I don't know, for every water reservoir $1 million, $12 million, he told him, Halveni shtei mesrei mayonis, I want you to lend to me. I want to borrow all of these 12 water reservoirs, and not for me. That's a tremendous amount of water. In order for there to be ample water supply for all of the people that are coming to Yerushalayim. And now, like this, I'm going to tell you like this. I will either replace the water in the water reservoirs, meaning rain is going to fall, and if not, then I'm gonna give you a crazy amount of water. Either shtei mesrei einois mayim, and ve'im eini noisen loch. Obviously, they set a certain date. Then hareini noisen loch shteim esrei kikar kesef. One kikar means a talent. One kikar is 6,000 dinars. In other words, he was not gonna pay him the current market value. He was either going to just replace it at a certain date. Now, why would that person do it? He wants interest, because the upside for the Odain would be that if it's the water, if it doesn't rain that amount to fill up all the water reservoirs, he would give him probably 10 times its worth. So like a gamble. And that Odain accepted it. And they established a time. Says the Gemara that Kivan Shigia Hazman V'Liyard Gshamim. So Nagdiman got the water. All the Jewish people went to the Yerushalayim. Everyone had water. Mashke, 12 things on my ass. Now you got to pay for it. So the time came and didn't rain yet. Now, there was really the first disagreement between them was when you set a date, what does it mean? Ad ve'ad b'chlal or ad v'lo yad b'chlal? The Adin felt that he has to get paid up until that date. It's already due. Nagdim and Ben Gurion, and they agreed. They both ultimately agreed to that. Told them, no, that I still have today to pay. Well, the meaning of most people is before a bill is in Brazil, before a bill is due, you don't even know the money. Forget about thinking about it, you don't even know it. When the due date comes, then so that's what. So until the date, there's nothing to talk about. Now the date came. So Shalach Loi, this wealthy person, sent a message to Nagdim Ben Gurion. Shagali oimayim oimois. So Shalach Loi, so Nagdim told him, Adayin yesh li zman. What shall I have time? Have until the end of the day. The day is big. Kol hayom kol shali. Today is my day. Ad va'ad b'chlal. Not shachris, not mincha. I have until it's dark. Okay, and he accepted that. Batzoharayim means mere early afternoon. Early afternoon. It's already late. Shagali. It sounds either give me back my water or the money that you owe me. That's 12 kikars. That's a crazy amount of money. Send me back, not $12 million, I don't know, $50 million. Shalach Loi, to which Nagdim responded, Adayin yesh li shus bayoim. Okay, but mincha shalach Loi. Mincha means mincha ketana. So he tells him, Shager li mayim moishesh li biyotch. So again, shalach Loi Adayin yesh li shus bayoim. This is mamish the story of the Baal Shem Tov, ki yodua, how they saw how this person had a munah. At that point, ligleg olav oisa adin. And Omar, Kol Hashanah Kula Layarduk Shamim. Why there was no water to begin with because there was a drought on top of Daf Chav, today's Daf. In other words, he felt that by the laws of nature, even if it begins to rain, it's too late for them to fill up. So that Adin was going to wait until it gets dark, but he felt that his gamble was worth it. He won the gamble. He's going to get the 12 kickers of silver. And he celebrated how? By doing something that only a billionaire would do. What would a billionaire do? When there's a drought, you don't have drinking water. No one bathes in water. Bathing in water, you need a lot of water. It's expensive. He felt so wealthy that nichnas labeis hamerchatz. You have to appreciate this nuance. He is taking already a bath because he made billions. And besimcha. Okay, says the Gemara. As much as he was happy, Nagdimain nichnas labeis Midrash, and he was equally unsafe. He was depressed. And the Satev, when we daven, we put on a talis or we put on a gartel. V'amad b'tefilla. And Amar lefanav ribono shel olam goli v'yadua lefanecha sheloi lechvodi yasisi. I didn't give the water to get honor, and only God knows the truth. It was if I would have done it for my honor, to get my name on a flyer, to get my name on the building, maybe I don't deserve a miracle. But I did it l'shem shamayim. I didn't even do it to give honor to my father, to my family. The only reason why I donated all that water was l'chvoid chasisi. I did it for your honor, which means shiur mayim etzoyim lo'oler golem, which is the only reason why everyone came. And as he uttered these words, miyad niskashru shamayim ba'avim, the skies became filled with clouds. The yardu geshamim achenismalu shteim esrei mayonis mayim, and the hoisiru, which means wherever the water level was when he received the water, now you had even more water. Mamash, at the same time, when this guy left the bathhouse, Nagdim and Ben Gurion left the Beis HaMikdash, and they met each other. So now the Adin was constantly demanding payment that day. Now it went to the opposite direction. So Amaloi, that means Nagdima and Ben Gurion told that Adin, now you owe me money. He didn't mean you owe me money. But what he told him was, look what I gave you back more than you gave me. And it wasn't really a halachic demand, but it was just Nagdiman's way of telling him, you nudged me the whole day. Now, maybe you owe me the money. Amaloi. And this Adin said two statements. Number one, Yodei ani I know that I know such a rain after such a drought. Well, right now, I know it's because of you. But, not only do I have a pischan peh, but I feel, says the Adam, that I have a leg to stand on for me to still demand money of you. Why? Because it was already now shkia, whether it means shkia, whether it means seis, the day was over. If we would have had watches, it was already in the PM. It was already at night. And therefore, God gave you rain, but too late. Ukshamim was birishusi yardi. It was after the time that we made up. So what happened here was chazav and nichnas l'beis hamikdash. This is asking for a miracle. Because let's say if the tzeis hakechavim was 6 o'clock, it was 7 o'clock. It was too late. There was only one thing, that since there was so much rains, the skies were still filled with clouds. The only way out of this was in order for the sun to have stopped. And now if the skies will clear up, now everyone will see that the sun is still on the horizon. And here it's a different tefillah. Show God that you not only have individual relationships with people, but you love some of them. Meaning, in a revealed way. Miyad nisparzu ha'avu. The clouds were dispersed, and not only that, v'zor chachamon. Now again, that's the point. The v'zor chachama was a nest, not that the clouds dispersed. We'll see in the Girsa right now. Either nikdera. Now, guys, nikdera means to pierce. Look inside the Rabbeinu Hanan. The Rabbeinu Hanan has another version. Nikdema. Nikdema, kedem means east. According to Rabbeinu Hanan, it wasn't only that the sun pierced the clouds. That's not such a big nest. It was a nest that it rained at that time, but that wasn't a complete changing of nature. Nikdema, that he saw that the sun stopped in the skies. It stayed in the east. If that would not have happened, again, even though I know that it rained for you, but I still would have taken you to Adon Torah. But now that such a miracle happened, then you don't owe me anything. And Tana, we learned in a Braisa that really, his real name was Buni. Here again, the two versions. What you have in your Gemara is Shenik Dera. Shenik Dera means piercing. Shenik Dera Chama Ba'avurai. And the Rabbeinu Hananel says Shenik Dema. It goes better with the words Nagdimoin. Nagdimoin is from Kedem, from east, that the sun stopped in the skies for him. Wow. And indeed, Tana Rabbanan. Shloisha Nikdem Olam Chama Ba'avurim. Throughout our history, there were 3 people for whom God made the sun stop. The word east is because of the Galgal Hayomi's movement, in spite of the fact that the Galgal Lacham is going in the opposite direction, from us, it looks like the sun is going from east to west. So when there's a stoppage in all of the heavenly body movements, the sun stays in the east. Who are the 3 people? Moshe, Yoshua, and Nagdimain Ben Gurion. So as we spoke on in the introduction, comes along the place for Son Avodah Zarah, and he asked, "Was is with Yaakov Avinu befedish?" What happened over there? That in Peniel, right, that the sun was in the horizon for a longer amount of time in order for Yaakov's wound to heal. Answers Tosfos, nah, you're forgetting what happened before. Prior to that story, the sun set quicker than usual. That was in order for Yaakov to go to sleep where he slept. So when the sun then stayed in the horizon or came up in the horizon quicker than usual, that was Tashlumin. Here, there was no Tashlumin yet. Here, Hashem stopped the sun to perform a miracle in the 3 times. Now, where do we have these 3 times? So the Gemara asking, Bishlam and Agdim Ben Gurion. Now we have it, Gemara. I'm saying when I was a child and I heard this story, I don't remember hearing that the sun stopped in the sky. I remember the story that it got cloudy and it rained, and then the clouds went away, and they saw it wasn't yet Shkia. It's much more than that. Is that Pashit, the sun stayed in the horizon longer than usual for the miracle to happen. Yeshua also beferish, it's a pasuk in Yeshua where it says Vayid.
Girl.
I'm sorry. As it says Vayidoim Hashemesh. The word Vayida means silence, because when the heavenly bodies move, there is a noise that it makes. We're going to learn about this in Gemara. It means it stopped. that the sun stopped. It wasn't just the sun. It was the whole Galgal Hayomi, which means that the moon also stopped. Ella Moshe Minolon, Amar Abelazar. So we're going to have two opinions where we have the Gezeidah Shava from. Now, either from the words Ochel, Ochel, it says in Pashas Devarim, Ochel, Teis Pas Hashem says that I will begin to put the fear of the world. People will have, all of the nations will be afraid of you. It says by Yehoshua, Ochel Gadlecha. Just like by Yehoshua, the fear. Why would people fear him? People see that Hashem stops the sun for someone. That's a reason to fear. You have it. Shmuel ben Achmeni also has a Gezeidah Shava, but it's from different words. It's from the words taste. Taste means I'll put. Taste. It says over here, Ochel taste pachtacha also in the bottom. It says by Yehoshua, b'yoim taste Hashem esu amoidi. Again, so it's different sources. The question that is not discussed over here is that when did the sun stop from Moshe Rabbeinu? It's good to point out that sometimes we find that the sun stopped during the Milchemes Sichain, and other times we find that it stopped during the War of Oig. And let's go both. Stopped in both wars. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, I don't need to have a Gezeidah Shava because it says in that pasuk itself in the Varim, Asher Yishmu'un Shem'acha v'rogzu v'chalom mipanecha. God says that the nations are going to hear all about you and they will tremble. They will be afraid of you. Why will everyone be afraid of you? It's interesting. Not because of what happened in Mitzrayim. This is what brought the fear of God into all the nations of the Jewish people. That what made everyone really fearful? And the way the Mefarshim, because no one knew the miracles. They heard, when you hear a nest, you say, exaggerated. The Hasidim made the story grow a beard. No, when the sun stopped by Milchemes Sichain and Milchemes Oig, it stopped in the whole world. Everyone saw that Taka, the sun stopped. Oigavot. Let's go back to the Mishnah. Mishnah says, right? And we quoted the pasuk in Amos. Again, that pasuk speaks about it raining in one place, not raining in the other place.
Rabbi, was that a total eclipse?
No eclipse. There was just a stoppage of the movement in the heavens, not an eclipse. The sun was up when we were battling by Yehoshua. The battlefield was positioned that the sun was in the eyes of the enemy. And that gave us the advantage to win the war. And therefore, God stopped the sun for us to fully win the battle. Not to draw a truce, but to win the battle by obliterating the enemy because the sun, it was just a gnat. We got lucky. We didn't get lucky. God stopped the sun. And that won the war. Right there. That the pasuk that the Mishnah quotes in Amos, see, the Mishnah gave two cases. We learned that in last daf. Sometimes there is a drought here. The neighboring cities don't have a drought. They also have to cry out to God because we're going to go and take their resources. We're going to, the burden of the drought in one locale will spread to the other locale. The pasuk in Amos is speaking about something much worse. Says Rabbi Marav that pasuk is speaking about no rain here and too much rain there. Okay, so now that Rabbi Yehuda Marav took a pasuk and made it sound worse than you could have understood it to mean. There it's shteim l'klala. To counter that, maybe the Gemara is telling you again, like we spoke out, that we're going to have it. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, not once, not twice, but 4 times, takes a pasuk that appears to be writing something negative, and he finds something positive. When it says in Eicha that Hoisa Yerushalayim became like a nida beinayim. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, that in this terrible calamity, there's also a remes for something good. That Yerushalayim only became like a nida. And there's a bracha to that. Because the status of a nida is not forever. At some point, the woman goes to the mikveh and there's a reunion. So ma nida yesh la heter, even when there was Taka, a status of galus, but Yerushalayim, temporary galus. Af Yerushalayim yesh la takanam. Number 2, when it says also in Eicha that the Yerushalayim was like a widow. So ki alman, like a widow. That's a bracha. Because it doesn't say Yehoisa Yerushalayim Almana. There's only a Chafadimian. Ka'almana v'le almana mamish. What does it mean? Like a widow? Like a woman whose husband's traveled, but he's going to come back. Ela ki'isha shalach bala v'dinas hayam. As long as the husband plans to return, So she feels like she was abandoned, but there's going to be a reunion. God is planning to return. Pasuk number 3, we got to get moving. Where it says, a pasuk in Malachi, that what? That I made you, that's we the Jewish people, despised and lowly. Yehuda, that also means a bracha. There is an upside for the goyim viewing us in a non-positive way. That the goyim amongst whom we lived during Golus never appointed us to be policemen or tax collectors. Tax collectors is the nahari, because it was common that on the rivers they would put booths, like in New York City, wherever you go, there's a booth, and people despise tax collectors. So it's nachanes that the goyim never made us into the tax collectors or into the policemen, because then there would be even more animosity from the masses against the Jewish people. Now, why didn't their governments appoint us at that effect? Because they don't trust us, or because they look at us as lowly. They despise us, but that's a bracha for us. And the fourth pasuk is a pasuk in Melachim, where it says, "V'hik Hashem es Yisrael," that God forbid this happened, that Hashem hit the Jewish people. Kasher yanud hakone b'mayim. The way a reed is being hit, now it's not being hit, the way it's moving back and forth in water. Because we're wandering here and wandering there, but we compared the Jewish people like a reed in the water. Oh, so says Amarav, that's also a bracha. There is a bracha aspect to it. That when we say that nemonim pitzei oyev, that if you have a wound, if it's inflicted by someone who loves you, that's better, that's more trustworthy than the kiss given to you by someone who's your enemy. What does that refer to? When Achia Shiloni reprimanded us, as we'll quote a pasuk, his words of klala is better than the bracha given to us by Bilam Arash. Achia Shiloni, he used the words kana, as we have quoting the pasuk, Yisrael, that the Hik Hashem is Yisrael. That was the pasuk that we quoted the Malach. That Hashem is going to afflict us. Hashem is going to beat us. The way a reed is always being moving around. We're going to be navanad. The way we're going to be kasher yonot hakana b'mayim. Oh, he meant something good with that. That ma'akana is oimid b'makam just like a reed b'chlal. A reed only grows in a watery place. So that alone is a bracha. Number 2, a reed has a unique characteristic that even if you cut down the tree proper, the whole thing is just a stem, it grows back, right? Not like a tree. Once you cut it down, that's it. The reed itself, you cut it, it grows. Like a bamboo, you cut it, it grows. And the shorosh of merumim, and it has a lot of roots. And therefore, even if you have all the winds in the world blowing against it, it sways, but it's not uprooted. It goes with the wind. So therefore, therefore, that when the winds are doimim, when the winds are silent, when the winds comes down, then and the kana was not destroyed. He gave us a bracha, but he purposefully in his bracha used the eres, the cedar tree. Sounds like it's big. And we're quoting the pasuk in Balak where it says, "Ka'arazim alei moyim," that we will be like cedars on the water. And that's what we have it in parentheses. And eres doesn't need to be in the waters. It's always better to live where there's waters. He meant dafka not. We shouldn't always be near waters. And the ein gizei machlef. Once you cut off the trunk, it doesn't grow back. The ein sharash merumim, and it doesn't have big roots. And therefore, on one hand, the cedar is very strong. So your average winds, the whole sugya of winds is in Bava Basra and in other places. So there's the southern wind. That's a terribly strong wind. But other than the southern wind, Taka, you're a cedar. You're not going to be ein mazizes. It's not like even in his klala, he could not foresee us being blown away easily. But he told us we should be like an eres, because he also was trying to hint that if there is this very strong southern wind, then dafka, because the cedar doesn't budge, it's stubborn, it doesn't sway in the wind, that takonosoi is its kalkolosoi, that ruins it. It will uproot it. And that will be it. It's going to turn it on its face. Another bracha hinted in the words of Achia Hashiloini that when it comes back to the reed, that what do we use to write stam, to write Sefer Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim? We use a reed. And by the way, some people, even though you are allowed to use the feather of a kosher bird, many people dafka use the reed because of our Gemara. And let's go weiter. Tana Rabbana, this is indeed what we know. A person should be soft. A person should be flexible. We're not speaking about our commitment to God. We're speaking about interpersonal relationships. Don't be that stubborn. Don't be that firm. Fakir, be soft. Don't be hard like a cedar. And indeed, where do we have the story? Maisem Shabbat Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. The great Tanach was traveling from the place called Migdar Godoil. He was traveling. Why was he there? Mi Beis Rabbi. We'll see the Rebbe's insight why that's important. He was riding on a chamor. And just I'll go right to the punchline. It's late that he's coming from his Rebbe. So therefore, this is just to underline that whatever happened over here was coming from a tzaddik. Not to think that he made the type of mistake that me and you can make. Riding on a chamor also indicates a person who's always in charge of their chumniyazdik. Someone who's a tzaddik, who's never under their chumniyazdik, they're never influenced by the chamor inside of us, but you're riding on a donkey is an expression used dafka by great tzaddik. And he was Metail al Sfas Nahar, another ruchniyazdika place. The water is the Alma Diskasia, means he was in a very spiritual place. And Nevuah is only shayed on someone who's besimcha. And v'samach simcha nedoil. Relative to his level, he was in a very exalted state of mind. But turning to that, now what happened? Came along a person who was very ugly, and that very ugly person, I'm going to go straight to the answer. The Rebbe's explanation over here. Ugly means beruchnius, very ugly. What brings apart beauty or ugliness in one shell? Someone, the more bottle we are to God, then the more beautiful we are. The more we feel ourselves to be independent of God, connected to our entire topic, the more we, God forbid, buy into this erroneous understanding that nature is going naturally. God can intervene, but when things are it's happening. No, Hashem is not only the Boira Olam, Hashem is the manig of the world. There's Hashgacha Pratis. The more one denies that, the more ugly one becomes. Another Nakuda, that there is a certain time where the physical world reflects the spiritual. This person was also physically ugly, but his physical ugliness came about because he was beruchnius ugly. He was beruchnius ugly because he completely disconnected the world from God. So Amaloi, so this ugly person greeted the Tana, Shalom Alecha Rebbe. The tzaddik at first, seeing that there is a person that's completely not God-centered, complete denial of God or denials of Hashem's involvement in the world, the tzaddik did not want to interact, not knowing how to inspire that person for tshuva. So he ignored it. So Amaloi, in other words, means not only did he not reply in a Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem HaShalom, but Amaloi, so the Tana tells him, you Reika, you empty one, how ugly are you? In other words, sometimes the way you aspire someone to do tshuva is by pointing out their ugliness. And then he added that Shema kol b'nei ircha mechuarim kamoischa. Maybe everyone in your locale is as ugly as you. This actually was a limut schus. Maybe the reason why you never connect God to your life is because you were influenced by your surroundings. Maybe that's why. But he told them very sharp words. So Amaloi. So for that, this Muchur tells the Tana, I don't know about whether all the people in my city are as ugly as me. But when you're telling me that I'm ugly, for the first time in his life, he connected himself to God. That was his tshuva. It worked. So Amaloi, Ela lech ve'emoy lo'umen sha'asani, go to the one who crafted me, which means to God. Here he was moida, that he was made by a God, and tell the craftsman, Kama mechur klei zeh she'asisa. How ugly is the vessel that you made? Wait, in other words, he succeeded in getting that person to admit that my ugliness is from God, which is already the beginning of a ceiling. But all of that inspiring and succeeding in getting that person to become again God conscious and to acknowledge that everything is b'hashgacha pratis, but he used very sharp words. He insulted that person. And now we have to fix that. This is mamish like we learned before. You have a Taanis cholim, fast on Shabbos. And then you got to fast for what you're fasting. So now the Tana has to do tshuva for insulting that person. It worked. He wasn't stam, but he insulted it. So the Ruchnis, he felt like he lost his great level. He was no longer riding on the donkey. And now he humbled himself and he bowed down to him. For Amaloi, na nesilach. Now nesilach means the fabrengen was too sharp. And therefore forgive me. Amaloi, so this ugly man said, Eni moichalach. He went back, go to the one who made me, you go to God. The Emerloi kama mechoy kliz eshasis. Wow. So now the Tana, this is Rabbi Lazar, followed him. When this guy was Mustama, big knacker, and everyone came to greet him. And when they saw that right behind him is, or maybe the people heard that Rabbi Lazar is coming, there was a big Kabbalah spun him. And he realized how everyone who saw Rabbi Lazar told him, Shalom Alecha, Rebbe, Moiri, Rebbe, Moiri. Wow, everyone was greeting Rabbi Lazar. Amar Lahem, so this ugly man said to them, Rebbe. Not to me. Maybe that was also part of his tshuva. Now he is humble. So they told him, no, not to you. He's a Rabbi Lazar. Amar Lahem, im ze Rebbe. If this is a Rebbe, al yirbu kamoise be Yisrael. May there not be like him. Oh, Amar Lahem. So they asked him, "Pnei ma?" Amar Lahem, kach v'kach chasali. We had a fabrengen, and did he give it to me? So Amar Lahem. So they told this other mechur, who's no longer mechur b'yosid. He already started to do tshuva. Afal pikein mechoyloi. She'adam gadol b'toyrohu. Which means again that there was a reason why he did it. Amar Lahem, b'shvilchem haneni moichaloi. Since you are all asking me to forgive him, because of you, I'll do it. As long as he is machlit, that he figures out how to inspire other people to do tshuva without that much gevura. Miyad nichnas Rabbi Loza ben Abshimah v'darash. That lo'oila mehi adam anachka konav al yikosha ke'eres. In other words, Rabbi Loza saw another good midah in the other mechor, that he was forgiving. If he would have remained stubborn, he never would have forgiven Rabbi Loza. And here again, the reason why it's ideal to use the quill from a reed, because the reed represents the type of good midah of being soft and not being firm between man and man. Back to the Mishnah. Let's keep on moving. If there's an epidemic, or if God forbid there is an earthquakes, right? So we're speaking about the Taanis seaboard that is declared immediately for the east. When buildings fall and you have to demand a public fast day, it's only if they are b'riyos, if there are strong buildings, and not if they are ru'os. You know, if people don't do their part and the buildings start built and the foundations are not good foundations, don't always say, God, what's going on? Find the engineer and go make sure that that all the other buildings that he built, go and fix it. In other words, it's only if buildings that were not roi to fall and they fell. That's the tzara, not buildings that were roi to fall. Now the Brisa seems to be repeating itself. So this is now the Gemara. Haini ubrius, haini usheinu roi slipo. Haini rois, haini roi slipo. Like the Brisa is repeating itself. So the Gemara says, no. See, the second clause is needed, that even when you have a building that the foundation or the walls are strong, but you made it too big, and that's why it failed. The naflu machmas givayayu. That's also not a reason for you to declare a fast day, because the guy doesn't know how to build. Inami, or even if it was built with strong walls, but you built it aguda dinar, or you built it in Miami near the water, and the waters corrode the foundation. In other words, anything that was built in a way that by the laws of nature, this is a building that's going to collapse. Yes, everything is ashgacha pratis, but you have to resolve it by discovering the faulty people who built it and resolve it that way. Okay. Or noch a reason, says the Gemara, there was once a very weakly built building in the city of Naharda'ah. And Rav and Shmuel never would walk right aside of it, under it, literally. It doesn't mean under it, it means on side of it. Now, what's the chiddush over here? No one should. So here there's another nuance, that if something is not built properly, but it's standing for so many years, so there's a certain point where you can argue and say, must be sturdy, didn't fall. Even though it stood in that not ideal condition for 13 years, nevertheless, and look inside the Rashi, 20 lines from the top of the Amid, right? That the notes, by the very fact that something is standing for a long amount of time, it means it was built well. The hakama ba'asra kulahai. Afila hacha zakt Rashi kiven the ru'ahi, since it was not built as sturdy as the other walls. Lo yahava chalfi tusa Elohim akiv sivavisi. In other words, don't rely on miracles. Don't go into dangerous scenarios. Yom echad, one day, ikla Rav Ada bar Ahava lohasam. Rav Ada bar Ahava came to visit that area, Nardam. Amalei Shmuel lirav. Nesif mar nakif. Wow. Let's go around the wall. We're in that. Let's keep away from that building. That's what Shmuel tells Rav. So Rav responds to Shmuel. Ooh, now that Rav Ada's with us, we don't have to walk. We don't have to make a detour. In the merit of Rav Ada, a miracle is going to happen. The wall is not going to collapse now. The Ikar of Ada bar Ahava bahadon, since the Nafesh Zechusei, since he's such a great tzaddik, he has so many zchusim, v'loi mistafino, we should not be afraid of the wall falling. A new concept now. So on one hand, Rav, Shmuel, the greatest Amoraim, they went by the laws of nature. But on the other hand, when there was someone else with them that they considered a tzaddik, so there's a certain window where you have the right to say that in the merit of Rav Ada, it's not going to collapse on us right now, and we can rely on the tzaddik. These are very important concepts. How to apply them is step number 2. But the step number 1, which is on one hand, don't rely on miracles. Everything is hashgacha pratis, but don't put yourself in danger. Stay away from danger. Mitzat sheni, if there's a tzaddik with you, don't be afraid of the danger. That's a concept we find in the Torah, and now the Gemara says a story. Rafuna havaleyahu chamra ba'ahu beisadeiyah. Chamra here doesn't mean a donkey. It was speaking about the kamai, he had wine. Rafuna had wine in a certain home. Now the home was a re'iyah. It was a home that was of collapsible material. And Boyele Fanuye and Rafuna wanted to take his commodity out of the house before the house will collapse. But the Rafuna was afraid to go into the house. It might collapse when he enters the house. What did we just learn? That Rav Ada bar Ahava was such a great tzaddik that we can rely on him, that if he's with you, nothing won't collapse when he's with you. So what did Rafuna do? Now the truth is, Rafuna himself was a big tzaddik. We're going to learn that we'll see how far Rafuna had many zchusim. No one should rely on themselves. Rafuna did not rely on himself. So Shailei Rav Ada bar Ahava lo Hassan. He brought Rav Ada. Now Rav Ada bar Ahava did not know that he was being called, so to say, to be used for the miracle. He didn't know that. When Rav Ada was in the house, Mashchei b'shmaitza depanye. So Rafuna got Tony to come take out the wine. He got someone that was stark, like a gibber, to take out the wine. But he wanted for Rav Ada to be in the house. So while they were in the house, they began to talk and learning. So he kept him in there until all the wine was removed. Once all of the wine was out, and then Rafuna walked out. Boom! After they walked out, Nafal base of the whole house collapsed. It was Taka Sakonos Nefashos to be in there. After they walked out and the house collapsed behind them, then Argish Rav Ada bar Ahava, he thought that why did Rafuna call me into the house? Because he wanted to use my divine protection to protect his wine, and he wasn't happy. An ikbad. What happened with that ikbad? Maybe the wine got ruined, so it didn't help at the end. I don't know. Because Rav Ada holds lo oilam al yamoid adam b'mekayim sakana and v'oimed. God is going to make a miracle. You know why? Because Shem ein loisinaynes. And im tim soleimer, even if you're a tzaddik on the level that for sure God is going to make a miracle. Rav Ada was not going to get hurt, but menakem loy mezuchi yosa. But the merits of the person will be deducted by the fact that the miracle was forced to happen because of them. And that's something that we find in scripture. Amar Rav Chanan. Where do we find that in the pasuk? Right in Parshas Vayishlach that we just read a while back, where Yaakov Avinu said, and maybe I lost all of my merits because of the miracles you did to me up until now. How great is this? Can you do the story of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov gave a bracha to a couple to have children, and they were not meant to have children. And Tzadik Goyzer v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. And Menakem Mizuchi Yosef. And that the Baal Shem Tov heard the heavenly voice that said that you, Baal Shem Tov, you forfeited your share to the world to come. You used it all up. The Baal Shem Tov says, oh, it's good. The Baal Shem Tov danced, and he says, now I can finally serve God, l'shma. Now that I know I'm getting no reward. But that's one of the ways that you can lose your reward, so to say, using up all your schusim. When I was in yeshiva, my friend told me that the Lubavitcher Bachram use up all of their schusim of miftzoyim by speeding on the highways, that were so reckless, and nothing ever happens, or hardly ever. It's like a nes, but we're eating up all of the schusim, which doesn't matter, because the ikid is that yid should put on tefillin, that yid should light him anoido. But that's the whole Gemara, and it's amazing that Rav Huna did not rely on his own sitkis, but he relied on Rav Ada. Now we want to find out what was the unique characteristics of Rav Ada bar Ahava. And Taka, why did he merit that they walked into a building that should have collapsed, and it didn't collapse only because he was in it? My Hava uvdi the Rav Ada bar Ahava ki had the itmem. Sha'alu talmidim es Rabbi Zera, or the talmidim asked Rav Ada bar Ahava, one of the two, and they asked him, why did you merit to have a long life? And he gave them a whole list. And number one, miyomai. I never expressed anger in my home. That means outside their home, for sure, they never expressed anger. That's b'chal d'minig. You go to shul, the guy is the nicest guy, and he can be the most nervous person in his home. But even in his home, he never expressed anger. Number two, when I walked with someone who I considered greater than me, so I never walked ahead of him. I walked a little bit behind him by giving him that type of covet. Number three, this is a sugya that we have in brachas and in other places. When you are walking in alleyways in where there is a bad odor, so there's a machloikas. Everyone agrees that you may not speak words of Torah. Some even add that you may not even think words of Torah. Rav Ada bar Ahava felt that halachically you could think divrei Torah, but he went beyond the letter of the law and he didn't even think words of Torah. You have to appreciate this. That means there's a Jew that is unable to detach himself from Torah. But since it's not about me learning Torah, it's about God. So if God doesn't want me to learn, the same way I serve God by learning, the same way I'll serve God by not learning. But it was very difficult for him. That was another merit. Furthermore, he never walked daladamas during the daytime without wearing talis and tefillin. Another mile. I never slept in the Beis HaMedrash. Now, in a Beis HaKnesses, halachically, you may not sleep. In a Beis HaMedrash, you are allowed to sleep. Not permanently, but you can doze off. But he didn't do that. No, it's not only not shinas keva, it's already not that respectful, unless the place was made lechatchila for that. You have to know the time of the place. Not even a nap. If I saw one of my colleagues making a mistake, I never rejoiced in the mistake of my colleague, even if their mistake authenticated his opinion. He was never happy with their downfall. Now we have two versions. He never called his friend either with with a nickname, nor another version, he never called his fellow with his surname. Now we're speaking here, very important, about derogatory nicknames, or there are some times that a derogatory nickname was not made up for you, but the whole family has this derogatory surname, family name. So if there's any added name that's given that's not positive, that was something that he never used. He was very sensitive in how he called his fellows. Now, the point of the Gemara now will be, we have another few minutes, that even though Rav Huna did not want to rely on his own tzidkis, so when he wanted to save his wine, he called Rav Ada bar Ahava. The Gemara wants to make it clear that Rav Huna himself merited that ness. Let me tell you, tell me something great about Rav Huna. Leiman lo mar mahani milam Aliyah. I want you to say words of praise regarding the behavior of Rav Huna, side of his humility. Amalei that biyankusei lo dechirna. In other words, I don't remember anything, not when I was young. That means I don't remember anything when Rav Huna was young. But vusei. But when Rav Huna got older, I can tell you about Rav Huna. The whole yoima the eva have mapikin lei bigoharka de dahava. Rav Huna was very into securing the city, and whenever there was a overcast, and obviously the city that he lived in had relatively dilapidated walls and fences that are prone to collapse if there is rain, Rav Huna took it upon himself to make sure that it doesn't hurt anyone. So he was asked to be taken out. Now there's a detail. He was taken out. He was carried in a golden sedan. The Ben Yehoyada adds that because not only Jews lived in that city, he went ahead and he wanted to preempt a building collapsing by imploding it. Like this, people will know it's falling. No one is going to get hurt. But the owner has to agree for us to break down the building before the storm. The Jew would acquiesce. The non-Jew needed to look up at Rav Huna. So he was carried around in a golden sedan. He was carried around in this biguharka d'tahava. So it made him appear like he's a very chashuv a person, which of course he was. So everyone would listen to him. The soil, like the Kolamasa, he would make an inspection. Any wall, a house wall, a chutzner wall, a city wall. If the house, if it was weak, now if it's not going to rain, it's not a problem. But if it was weak, that if it rains, the rain can knock it down, he would preempt it by knocking it down. In other words, you have to implode a building that could collapse. And if the owner had means, and Rav Huna made that determination, that he would ask for the owner to rebuild it, especially if these are walls that were needed for the city. But if the owner could not afford it, look at the greatness of Rav Huna. He didn't up taxes and the city is going to be built. Rav Huna out of his pocket did it. He practiced what he preached. He was very into making sure that everyone is safe without having to rely on miracles. How great is that? Furthermore, every Friday afternoon, he would send his chevra to go to the vegetable market. Listen to this beautiful thing. So you had gardeners. You had people that sold vegetables. You want to sell all of your produce before Shabbos because we don't do commerce on Shabbos. By Sunday, your vegetables are good for nothing. Rav Huna would buy all of the leftover vegetables, Zovinle and Vishadile Nanahara, and he would throw them into the river. Now, why did he throw them into the river? Hold on. We get the beauty of him not wanting for the vendors to go home with excess produce, because then the next week they're going to bring less. There might be a shortage. So he wanted them to, anything you brought was sold. But why did he throw it away? Why didn't he give it to the poor? Look at this answer. Answers the Gemara that if he would give it to the poor, then the poor people would never make an effort to buy food on their own for Shabbos, to buy vegetables. But don't forget that Rav Huna only bought the leftover vegetables if there were leftovers. If they ended up sending all of the produce to paying customers, Rav Huna would not buy it. and therefore the poor person wouldn't have anything, which is another important thing. Sometimes you help an ani, but you make him reliant on you. That's not good. So they knew maybe they'll be, maybe there won't be. So if ani was able to afford, he would buy. Zin and the samchet atayu, and he won't buy to begin with when there was no leftover food. Why did Rafuna ruin it? At least v'lashadye lebehema, give it to animals. A big statement over here. That food that was designated for people, you may not give to animals. Hold on, but you're throwing it away. So look inside the Rashi, 40 lines from the bottom. First of all, you don't give food designated for people to animals because it's called bizu yoichlin. It's almost like you're kicking the good that God gave you. God gave you food. Why are you giving away to an animal? Problem is ruining it. How is that not bizu yoichlin? Rashi, I'm skipping a few lines. That when he put it into the nahar, when you put vegetables on a body of water, it doesn't sink. It look inside Rashi. In other words, he put it in the river and it floated to the nearby village, and people found it. Did it always happen that way? Maybe not, but that was better than giving it to animals because of this concept that food designated for people should not be giving it to animals. Weiter. In other words, don't buy it. Don't buy it at all. No, because these growers are going to be afraid to bring a larger amount. They're going to bring a smaller amount, and there might be a shortage. Of food. So this is the greatness of Rafuna. We have another few minutes. Let's have another few things. Says the MERCAVA, if there was a medicine, the whole idea of generics, right? Medicine is expensive, and not everyone can afford it. What did Rafuna do? Have a male kuza mine. He would fill up a bucket with that medicine. And where did he put it? The talale b'seifa the besa. He would hang it from his door frame. V'amar, and he would say, "Call the boy leisim elishko. Whoever needs the medicine can come and take it." V'ikad amri. Other people say that milsa the shifta have a gomed. That Rafuna was an expert in the demon called shifta. The demon of shifta affects a person who does not properly wash negelwasser. People don't wash negelwasser, not because they're lazy, then because they had no water. Water is a commodity. The greatness of Rafuna is that he made water available for all out of his own pocket. That prevented people from becoming afflicted with the demon of shifta. He would suspend a bucket of water, and he would say, "Kol ditzrich leisei v'leil." Whoever needs water should not wash their hands in the morning, right? Alternating hands. We should do this to us, to our kids, in order for them not to get into a danger. Weiter, let's have another few lines. When he would sit down to eat bread, have a pasach labava, he would always open up his home and he would make the announcement that we make on the Seder. He would make it every time he ate, that kol man everyone is invited to join us. So came along Rava later and he says the following, that all of these great midos, his generosity and his ability, his financial ability to be that generous, to help the community, I also can keep. The last one I can't do. But the last one, that every time he ate a meal, he opened up his doors. On the top. There were many ways of learning it. Not because of the locals, because in the city where Rava was the Rav in Mechuzah, there were many government soldiers that had camps nearby. If he's going to open up his doors for the meals, the whole military will come eat off his table. He says, Ad kedei kach, that amount of money I do not have. A lot more to be continued. Right, so I was just sharing with the Chavra that we had a plan, and God is God is the master of my life. And it looks like that we are not going to the Holy Land. On the other hand, we're going to try to make a plan B. Anyways, I'm gonna try to keep to the times to the best of my ability. If anything, I'm going to give a class this afternoon to make up for tomorrow morning. But afterwards, I'll do my best to keep it consistent at LA 6 a.m. And if not, again, I'll do my best to give a class before. I'm definitely going to come back a lot earlier. I'm going to be back here, God willing, for Shabbos. But Dr. Hassan will always make sure that it's going to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Then this Perek is mamish amazing. like Gan Eden. Coming back to Yevamos will be a big